Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel, Aurora Edge, watching the massive alien station grow larger on the viewing screen. The structure was beautiful in a way that made her stomach twist with unease. Crystal spires twisted around metallic cores that pulsed with soft blue light, like a living heart beating in the void of space. She had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, ever since the first Zephyrian transmission had reached Earth. The message had been simple and direct in perfect English, somehow translated through means no human scientist could explain. They called themselves the Zephyrian Empire, and they wanted to meet with representatives of humanity. Lisa touched the small photo tucked into her uniform, pocket a picture of her daughter Katie, smiling on her 10th birthday. Katie, who was now 13, and probably worried sick about her mother heading into unknown space. Lisa had volunteered for this mission because someone had to go, and she was one of the few captains with both diplomatic training and combat experience. The diplomatic team consisted of 5 people, including herself. Dr. Amy Brooks was their xenobiologist, a brilliant woman who had spent her career studying theoretical alien lifeforms. Commander Rachel King handled security and had insisted on bringing 2 armed Marines, despite the peaceful nature of the mission. Lieutenant Susan Clark managed communications and had been working day and night to understand Zephyrian technology. The Zephyrian station was larger than any structure humanity had ever built. It dwarfed their ship, making the Aurora Edge look like a tiny insect approaching a great cathedral. As they drew closer, Lisa could see movement along the station's surface, graceful figures that seemed to flow rather than walk. High Counselor Veltar had been their primary contact, a being whose voice carried music, even through the cold transmission of space. He had spoken of peace and mutual understanding, of sharing knowledge between their species. He had invited them to a station with promises of friendship and trade agreements that could benefit both civilizations. Lisa felt the ship shudder slightly as they entered the station's docking bay. The artificial gravity field took hold of their vessel and guided it gently into place. The docking process was smooth and elegant, showing technology far beyond anything humans possessed. Dar Brooks was practically bouncing with excitement as they prepared to disembark. She had filled 3 data tablets with questions about Zephyrian biology, culture, and technology. Commander King checked her sidearm for the 4th time. Despite knowing the weapons were mostly ceremonial, the Zephyrians had weapons that could destroy their ship before they could draw a pistol. The airlock cycled open, and they stepped into the station. The air was breathable, but carried a strange metallic taste that made Lisa wrinkle her nose. The walls around them were smooth and seemed to shift color as they moved, reflecting their presence in subtle ways. High Counselor Veltar waited for them in the reception chamber. He was tall and elegant, with skin that looked like living crystal. His features were sharp and angular, but somehow beautiful in their alien perfection. When he moved, it was with a fluid grace that made human movement seem clumsy by comparison. "Welcome to our station," Veltar spoke, but his lips barely moved. Lisa realized with a start that she was hearing his words inside her head rather than through her ears. The telepathic communication felt like ice water running down her spine. "Species is most interesting," he continued, as he gestured for them to follow him. "We have observed your rapid expansion across your local space. Your technological development has been remarkable for such a young civilization." Lisa tried to project thoughts back at him, but felt nothing. She had no idea if telepathy worked both ways for humans. Dr. Brooks was asking eager questions about Zephyrian society while Lieutenant Clark recorded everything on her devices. Commander King stayed alert, watching for any signs of danger. They were led through corridors that seemed to pulse with life. The walls showed images of distant worlds and strange alien cities. Veltar explained that the Zephyrian Empire controlled hundreds of star systems and had made contact with dozens of species. Most had been peaceful encounters. He assured them the meeting chamber was a circular room with a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside. Lisa and her team were seated at a table that seemed to grow from the floor itself, while Tar and several other Zephyrians took positions around them. "We must discuss the future," Veltar began, his mental voice, carrying undertones that Lisa could not quite identify. Your species has great potential, but also great danger. You expand quickly, and your minds are difficult for us to understand. Dar Brooks leaned forward eagerly. What do you mean by difficult to understand? Veltar tilted his head in a gesture that might have been confusion or concern most species. We have ordered minds that follow logical patterns. Your thoughts are chaotic, unpredictable. It makes communication challenging. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. Something in the way he said challenging made her think of a predator discussing prey. Commander King must have felt it too, because she shifted slightly in her chair, moving closer to her weapon. We have studied your transmissions, Veltar continued. Your entertainment, your news, your history. Your species seems to glorify conflict and chaos. You celebrate individuals who cause disruption, rather than those who maintain order. The conversation continued for several hours, covering topics from human culture to technological exchange. Lisa began to notice that the other Zephyrians in the room were staring at her and her team with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Their crystalline faces showed no emotion, but their eyes seemed to be studying every movement, every expression. As the meeting progressed, Lisa became aware that more Zephyrians had entered the chamber. They stood along the walls, silent and watchful. Veltar seemed to be having some kind of silent conversation with them, his expression growing more troubled. Finally, he turned back to the human delegation. I am afraid there has been a change in our plans, he said, and Lisa heard something like regret in his mental voice. Your species represents a threat to the order we have maintained for millennia. Your chaotic nature, your resistance to proper mental contact, it cannot be allowed to Lisa started to stand, but found that her body would not obey her commands. The other members of her team were similarly frozen in place, only their eyes able to move. Dr. Brooks looked terrified, while Commander King was clearly struggling against whatever force held them. You will be studied, Veltar explained, as armed Zephyr guards entered the chamber. We will learn what makes your minds so resistant to proper order. We will understand your chaotic nature and find ways to correct it. Your species will be guided toward proper civilization. Lisa wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but her body remained paralyzed. She thought of Katie, waiting for her back on Earth. Katie, who would never know what happened to her mother. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness took her was Veltar watching her with what might have been curiosity or hunger. When she woke, she was alone in a cell that seemed to be carved from a single piece of crystal. The walls pulsed with soft light, and she could feel eyes watching her. Even though she saw no cameras or viewing ports, she was trapped millions of miles from home at the mercy of beings who saw humanity as a problem to be solved. Lisa sat up slowly and began to plan. She might be captured, but she was not broken, not yet. Zara Lynn stood before the vast viewing portal of the Imperial Mind Center, watching the stars turn slowly beyond the crystal walls. She was the most feared telepathic interrogator in the Zephyrian Empire, and beings across 100 worlds whispered her name in terror when they thought no one was listening. Her crystalline skin bore the scars of 1,000 mental battles. Thin lines of silver traced across her face and arms, where enemy minds had fought back too hard and caused psychic wounds that never fully healed. Each mark was a trophy, a reminder of a consciousness she had broken and reshaped to serve the Empire. The summons from High Counselor Veltar had come at dawn, transmitted directly into her sleeping mind with the urgency of Imperial command. She had responded immediately, as she always did when the Empire required her particular skills. There was work to be done, and she was the only one capable of doing it. Veltar waited for her in his private chambers, surrounded by the soft glow of thought crystals that amplified telepathic abilities. He appeared troubled in a way that Zara Lynn had rarely seen. The High Counselor was usually composed and certain, but today he seemed almost uncertain. We have captured representatives of a new species, he began without ceremony. They call themselves humans, and they present a unique challenge. Their minds resist our standard telepathic procedures and ways. We have never encountered. Zara Lynn felt a spark of interest she had broken the minds of countless species over her long career. Gas-breathing methane dwellers from the outer rim, silicon-based crystalline beings from the core world's energy creatures that existed in pure thought. All had eventually yielded to her techniques. What makes them different? She asked, allowing her mental voice to carry the confidence that had made her reputation. 3 of our best telepaths attempted to interrogate their leader, Veltar replied. All 3 were hospitalized with severe mental trauma. They described her mind as a storm of chaos that actively fought back against telepathic contact. This was interesting. Zara Lynn had encountered resistant minds before, but none that could actually harm a trained telepath during interrogation. Usually, resistance simply made the process take longer, not dangerous. The idea of a mind that could fight back was both challenging and exciting. Show me the reports, she commanded. Veltar gestured, and the walls around them filled with images and data. The human delegation appeared before her through the recorded memories of the guards. 5 beings, bipedal and primitive-looking. But something about them seemed different from other species she had studied. The leader was a female called Lisa Morgan, approximately 40 cycles old, with brown hair and determined eyes, even in the security recordings. Zara Lynn could sense something unusual about her posture, her expressions. There was a strength there that went beyond physical conditioning. Preliminary scans show chaotic brain patterns unlike anything in our databases, Veltar explained. Neural pathways that seem to follow no logical structure. Random firing of synapses that creates noise rather than clear thought patterns. Zara Lynn studied the brain scans with growing fascination. Most species had minds that operated like well-organized libraries with thoughts filed neatly and emotions controlled by logical processes. This human brain looked like a battlefield where different sections fought for dominance, while somehow still functioning as a cohesive unit. Where are the other members of their delegation? She asked. In separate cells undergoing standard processing. The scientist and communications officer have provided useful information about human technology. Their minds are chaotic but not as resistant as their leader. The military officer has required more intensive techniques but is beginning to break, but their leader remains unbroken, Veltar confirmed, which is why we require your expertise, Zara Lynn. The Empire needs to understand what makes these humans so resistant to proper mental control. If their entire species possesses this trait, they could become a significant threat to our expansions. Zara Lynn felt the familiar thrill that came before a challenging interrogation. She had earned her reputation by succeeding, where others failed by breaking minds that seemed unbreakable. The human would be just another trophy, another scar to add to her collection. I will need access to the full range of amplification equipment, she said, beginning to plan her approach. The deep probe apparatus, the memory extraction chambers, and at least 6 backup telepaths, in case the subject proves more difficult than expected. Of course, Veltar agreed. Everything you require will be provided. The Empire is depending on you to solve this puzzle. These humans must be understood so they can be properly controlled. Zara Lynn made her way through the corridors of the Mind Center, past laboratories where alien prisoners sat motionless with their minds stripped away and rebuilt to serve the Empire. She had created many of those empty shells, turning enemies into loyal servants through careful application of telepathic surgery. The human was kept in a high-security cell designed to prevent escape and minimize outside mental contact. Zara Lynn observed her through the viewing portal before making direct contact. She wanted to study her prey before beginning the hunt. Lisa Morgan sat in the center of the cell in a meditation pose that seemed somehow defiant. Her eyes were closed, but Zara Lynn could sense awareness in every line of her body. This was not someone who had given up hope. This was someone planning and preparing for battle. Interesting, Zara Lynn thought. Most prisoners at this stage were either broken by despair or raging helplessly against their confinement. This human seemed to be gathering strength from somewhere deep inside herself. It was almost as if captivity had made her more focused, rather than less. Zara Lin began her preparation rituals, meditation exercises that cleared her mind and focused her telepathic abilities. She consumed the enhancement drugs that would amplify her natural talents and strengthen her mental defenses. She had learned long ago that breaking another mind required absolute control of her own. The amplification chamber was prepared according to her specifications, neural interface headsets that would allow her to dive deep into the human consciousness backup systems that would monitor both minds during the interrogation and pull her out. If anything went wrong, she had broken generals who commanded armies, philosophers who had spent lifetimes training their minds, energy beings that existed as pure thought. The human would fall just like all the others. It was simply a matter of finding the right pressure points and applying force until the mind cracked. As she entered the interrogation chamber, Zara Lin felt completely confident in her abilities. She had never failed to break a subject, and she did not intend to start now. The human looked up as she approached, and for a moment their eyes met across the sterile space. There was something in that gaze that gave Zara Lin pause, a depth and complexity that seemed almost infinite. But she pushed the feeling aside and activated the neural interface equipment. The interrogation would begin and the human would break. She was the greatest telepathic interrogator in the Empire, and failure was not an option. The neural interface settled around Zara Lin's head like a crown of thorns. Each contact point sent small jolts through her skull. As the amplification systems came online, she could feel her telepathic abilities expanding, growing stronger with each passing second. The sensation was intoxicating, like drinking pure power across from her. Lisa Morgan sat strapped to the interrogation chair with matching neural interfaces positioned around her skull. The human appeared calm, almost meditative, but Zara Lin could sense the tension in her body like a coiled spring waiting to release. Begin Phase 1, Zara Lin commanded, and the technicians activated the primary systems. The first touch of human consciousness was like stepping into a hurricane. Zara Lin had expected resistance, but not this overwhelming flood of sensation and memory. The human mind did not fight back with telepathic abilities. It simply existed in a way that was fundamentally alien to Zephyrian understanding. Most minds Zara Lin encountered were organized like great libraries, with thoughts and memories filed away in logical categories. The human mind was more like a storm where everything existed at once. Past, present, and future seemed to blur together in a chaotic dance that made no sense. She pushed deeper, following established techniques for breaking resistant subjects. Find the core memories, the experiences that shaped the personality, and twist them until the subject lost all sense of self. But every memory she touched seemed connected to dozens of others in ways that defied understanding. Lisa Morgan thinking about her daughter Katie, but also simultaneously remembering her own mother and feeling echoes of evolutionary memory from ancestors she had never known. The concept of motherhood in the human mind was not just personal experience, but millions of years of genetic programming and cultural learning, all existing in the same mental space. Zara Lin tried to isolate the memory of Katie to use it as leverage against the human, but the emotion of parental love was so intertwined with everything else that attempting to extract it felt like trying to remove a single thread from a tapestry that would unravel the entire structure. The human had noticed her presence now, and instead of retreating or attempting to block the telepathic intrusion, Lisa Morgan seemed to be opening her mind wider, inviting the alien deeper into the chaos of human consciousness. "Come on in," she projected, with what Zara Lin recognized as sarcasm, an emotional concept that translated poorly into telepathic communication. "Let me show you what we are really like." Images flooded Zara Lin awareness faster than she could process them. Human history unfolding in all its terrible, beautiful complexity, wars and peace, discoveries and losses, acts of cruelty beyond imagination, and sacrifices so profound they defied rational explanations. She saw humans charging into battle, knowing they would die to protect strangers. She witnessed mothers giving their lives for children, scientists dedicating decades to solve problems that would benefit people they would never meet, Artists creating beauty in the midst of suffering and horror. The sheer illogical nature of it was overwhelming. Zephyrian minds operated on principles of logical self-interest, survival, and advancement of the species. Humans seemed to operate on principles that contradicted their own survival instincts. They chose suffering when they could choose comfort. They died for abstract concepts like honor and justice. Sarah Lynn tried to retreat to the analytical techniques she had mastered over centuries of practice. She attempted to categorize what she was experiencing to make sense of the chaos, but human consciousness refused to be organized. Every emotion seemed to contain its opposite. Every memory was colored by feelings that changed its meaning. The concept of sacrifice was particularly disturbing. Zephyrians understood giving up smaller gains for larger ones, but humans would sacrifice everything for others even when there was no logical benefit. Lisa Morgan memories contained images of soldiers throwing themselves on explosives to save their comrades' parents, working multiple jobs to send children to school, strangers donating organs to people they had never met. Why do they do this? Zara Lynn found herself thinking, but the question was lost in another wave of human experience. Music filled her awareness. But not just sound. Human music carried emotional weight that seemed to bypass rational thought completely. A simple melody could trigger memories of lost love, triumph over adversity, hope in the face of despair. The human concept of beauty was not based on logical principles, but on patterns that spoke directly to something deeper than conscious thought. Literature, poetry, all of it existed not to serve practical purposes, but to capture and communicate experiences that could not be expressed. Through logical communication, the human mind was constantly creating meaning from chaos, finding patterns and randomness that somehow made sense on levels Zara Lynn did not understand. She was losing herself in the flood of human consciousness, her own memories and experiences beginning to seem pale and limited by comparison. Zephyrian existence was ordered and logical, but it was also predictable and safe. Human existence was chaotic and dangerous, but it was also vibrantly alive in ways she had never imagined. The humans had a concept called love that went far beyond the Zephyrian understanding of pair bonding for reproduction. Human love could exist between individuals who would never reproduce, between members of different species. Even toward abstract concepts like justice or beauty, it was irrational and illogical, and somehow more powerful than any emotion Zara Lynn had ever experienced. Lisa Morgan was not just showing her memories now, she was sharing the full emotional experience of being human, the weight of consciousness that came with knowing that life was finite and precious, the terror and joy of existing in a universe that was vast and uncaring but somehow still beautiful. Zara Lynn tried to reassert control, to use her telepathic training to dominate the human consciousness, but she realized with growing horror that the interrogation had become something else entirely. She was no longer studying the human mind, she was being absorbed by etherneural interfaces that were supposed to protect her were amplifying the experience, making it impossible to retreat. Every moment of contact was changing her, teaching her what it meant to exist as something other than a rational, ordered Zephyrian being human. Consciousness was not just resistant to telepathic domination, it was transformative. Contact with it was changing her at fundamental levels that she could not control or reverse. She was experiencing emotions and concepts that had no equivalent in Zephyrian psychology, and they were rewriting her understanding of existence itself. For the first time in her long career, Zara Lynn felt fear, not the rational concern for survival that motivated Zephyrian behavior, but the deep existential terror that came with realizing that everything she had believed about consciousness and reality was wrong. The human was not breaking under interrogation, the human was breaking her. The interrogation chamber had become a battlefield of minds, but not in any way the Zephyrian technicians monitoring the session could understand. Their instruments showed energy readings that defied explanation, neural activity patterns that seemed to violate the basic principles of telepathic science. Zara Lynn consciousness was fragmenting under the assault of human experience. She had built her identity around being the perfect Zephyrian interrogator, logical, ruthless, capable of breaking any mind through superior technique, but human consciousness was teaching her that technique and logic were not the only forces that shaped reality. Lisa Morgan was not trying to hurt her. The human seemed genuinely concerned about the damage being done to the alien mind, but she was also relentless in sharing the full scope of human experience, as if she understood that half measures would not be enough to communicate the truth about her species. Look at this, Lisa projected, and suddenly, Zara Lynn was experiencing the memory of a human battlefield medic crawling through gunfire to reach wounded soldiers. She felt the terror and the determination, the absolute certainty that saving others was worth dying for, even when those others were strangers. To Zephyrian mind had no framework for understanding this kind of behavior. In Zephyrian society, individuals might sacrifice for the species or for logical long-term benefits, but dying for strangers served no rational purpose. It was waste and chaos, and somehow it was also the most beautiful thing Zara Lynn had ever experienced. She tried to retreat to her training to remember that she was conducting an interrogation for the good of the Empire, but the human memories kept coming, each one more impossible than the last. A human mother working 3 jobs to pay for her sick child. Medical treatment when abandoning the child would have been more logical. A scientist refusing to sell research that could make him wealthy, because it might be used to hurt people. A teacher spending her own money to buy supplies for students whose families could not afford them. Each memory came with the full emotional weight of human experience. Zara Lynn could feel what it was like to choose suffering over comfort, to value abstract concepts like justice and love over personal survival. The sensations were overwhelming and terrifying and addictive. Her own memories seemed thin and colorless. By comparison, a life spent in service to the Empire following logical principles and efficient methods. She had been proud of her achievements, but now they felt hollow mechanical exercises in domination, without any deeper meaning. The human concept of individual worth was particularly disturbing. Zephyrians understood that some individuals were more valuable than others, based on their abilities and contributions to society. But humans seemed to believe that every individual consciousness was precious, regardless of capability or usefulness. Sarah Lynn experienced Lisa Morgan memory of holding her newborn daughter Katie for the first time. The overwhelming flood of protective love that came not from logic, but from something deeper than thought, the absolute certainty that this tiny helpless creature was more important than her own life. It made no sense, but it felt more real than anything Zara Lynn had ever experienced. Her own life suddenly seemed like a pale imitation of existence, compared to the vibrant chaos of human consciousness. Telepathic link was supposed to flow one way from interrogator to subject, but human minds did not follow the rules of telepathic science. The connection had become bidirectional, and Lisa Morgan was learning about Zephyrian consciousness as quickly as Zara Lynn was drowning in human experience. You are not evil, Lisa projected with something that might have been compassion. You are just limited. Your entire species exists within boundaries that you cannot see. You have never learned what it means to be truly alive. The accusation was devastating, not because it was cruel, but because it felt true. Zephyrian civilization was ancient and sophisticated, but it was also static and predictable. Every individual knew their place and function. Every decision was based on logical analysis. Every emotion was controlled and channeled toward productive ends, but humans lived without such boundaries. Their emotions were wild and uncontrolled. Their decisions often defied logic. Their entire existence was a constant dance between order and chaos that somehow produced meaning and beauty and growth. Zara Lynn could feel her own mental structures beginning to crack under the pressure of human consciousness, the careful training that had made her the Empire's greatest interrogator was dissolving as she learned that there were other ways to exist, other ways to think and feel, and Beatty monitoring technicians were growing alarmed by the readings from both neural interfaces. The energy patterns suggested that something unprecedented was happening in the interrogation chamber, but their instruments could not measure the true scope of what was occurring. Sarah Lynn was not just learning about human consciousness, she was becoming infected by it. The logical ordered patterns of Zephyrian thought were being overwritten by the chaotic beauty of human awareness. She was losing herself, and finding something else in the process. Lisa Morgan showed her human art paintings that captured emotions too complex for words, music that spoke to parts of consciousness that logic could not reach, poetry that found meaning in suffering and beauty in imperfection, all of it created by beings who knew they would die, who lived finite lives in an infinite universe and somehow found ways to make those brief moments matter. The concept of mortality was perhaps the most alien aspect of human consciousness. Zephyrians lived for thousands of years, and saw death as a distant inevitability to be avoided. Through careful planning, humans lived barely a century, but their awareness of mortality seemed to make every moment more precious, more meaningful. They create because they know they will not exist forever, Lisa explained, and Zara Lynn could feel the weight of that truth. Every human achievement, every work of art, every act of love, was performed in the shadow of inevitable death. This knowledge did not paralyze them, it inspired them to make their brief existence matters. Lynn realized, with growing horror, that she could no longer think like a Zephyrian. The ordered logical patterns that had defined her consciousness for centuries were dissolving, replaced by the wild, chaotic beauty of human awareness. She was becoming something new, something that would never fit back into Zephyrian society. The neural interfaces were overloading, trying to process energy patterns. They were not designed to handle. Alarms began sounding throughout the chamber as the telepathic connection spiraled beyond all control. But it was too late. The damage was done. Zara Lynn consciousness had been fundamentally altered by contact with human awareness. She would never again be able to see existence through purely Zephyrian eyes. The greatest telepathic interrogator in the Empire was broken not by superior technique or psychic warfare, but by exposure to a way of being that her mind was not equipped to handle, and somehow, despite the terror and confusion, she felt grateful. The emergency protocols activated automatically as the neural interfaces overloaded, sending cascades of sparks across the interrogation chamber. Technicians rushed in to disconnect the systems while medical teams prepared to treat what they assumed would be too damaged. Mind Zara Lynn lay motionless on the examination table, her crystalline features twisted in an expression that no Zephyrian had ever worn before. It was not pain or anger or any emotion that her species typically displayed. It was something closer to wonder mixed with terror, as if she had seen the face of something divine and been forever changed by the experience. Lisa Morgan was conscious but quiet, allowing the alien medical personnel to check her vital signs without resistance. She had expected this outcome, had prepared for it during her days in captivity. She understood better than the Zephyrians what had just occurred in that chamber. The human mind was not designed to be read by telepaths. It was designed by evolution and experience to be chaotic, unpredictable, resistant to outside control. The very qualities that made humans seem primitive to advanced telepathic species were actually defenses against mental invasion. High Counselor Veltar arrived within minutes of the emergency alert, accompanied by the Empire's finest telepathic healers and mind specialists. They crowded around Zara Lynn, trying to assess the damage to their greatest interrogator, but what they found defied their understanding. Telepathic abilities were intact, but fundamentally altered. Instead of the precise, controlled mental touch that had made her famous, her psychic presence now radiated the same chaotic energy they had detected in human minds. She could no longer think in the ordered logical patterns that defined Zephyrian consciousness. "We must fix this," Veltar commanded, but the healers could only shake their heads in confusion. They had dealt with telepathic injuries before, minds damaged by psychic combat or overexposure to alien thoughts, but they had never seen anything like this complete transformation of consciousness. Sarah Lynn spoke for the first time since the interrogation ended, but her words carried concepts that translated poorly into Zephyrian. Language, she described experiences that had no equivalent in their culture, emotions that their species had never evolved to feel, ways of understanding existence that their ordered minds could not process. They are not animals, she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that sounded almost human. They are something we have never encountered before, something that makes our way of existing seem empty and false. The implications were staggering. If contact with human consciousness could transform even their greatest telepathic specialist, then humans represented a threat unlike anything the Empire had ever faced. Not a military threat, but something far more dangerous, a challenge to the very foundations of Zephyrian civilization. Emergency sessions were called at the highest levels of government. Specialists debated whether humans possessed some unknown psychic defense, whether their chaotic minds were the result of genetic engineering by some enemy species. The truth that humans were simply different in ways that made telepathic contact dangerous was too frightening to accept. Meanwhile, Lisa Morgan sat in her cell and waited. She knew that fear would drive the Zephyrian response. Now they had learned that humans could not be safely interrogated telepathically, and that knowledge would change everything. Dar Amy Brooks and Lieutenant Susan Clark were released from their cells within days. Their interrogations terminated early when the specialists realized the danger. Their minds had been damaged by the telepathic procedures, but they retained enough human consciousness to be infectious to other telepaths. Commander Rachel King took longer to recover. She had resisted more strongly than the others, and the damage to her mind was more severe, but even she carried within her consciousness the seeds of something that could transform any telepath who tried to read her thoughts. The official explanation given to the human delegation was diplomatic. Veltar spoke of technical difficulties and cultural misunderstandings. He expressed regret for the harsh treatment and offered compensation for the inconvenience. But Lisa could see the fear behind his polite words. Your species will be granted autonomous status within the Empire, he announced, as if he were offering a great gift rather than admitting defeat. Your systems will be marked as restricted space, and our ships will not enter them. Without invitation, Lisa understood the truth behind the diplomatic language. The Zephyrians were quarantining humanity, not out of respect, but out of terror. They had discovered that human consciousness was a weapon that could destroy their telepathic civilization simply through contact. The journey back to Earth was quiet. Dr. Brooks tried to make sense of the alien technology they had been allowed to study. Lieutenant Clark worked on her reports, and Commander King slowly recovered from her ordeal. But all of them carried within their minds the knowledge that they had changed the course of galactic history simply by being human. Lisa thought often about Zara Lynn during the long voyage home. The alien interrogator had become something new during their mental contact, no longer fully Zephyrian, but not human either. She had been transformed by exposure to a way of being that her species could not safely comprehend. When they arrived at Earth, Lisa was debriefed by intelligence agencies and scientific committees. She told them the truth that humanity possessed a natural defense against telepathic species, that their chaotic consciousness was actually a strength rather than a weakness. The implications rippled through human space as scientists and military leaders realized what this meant. Humanity was not just another primitive species struggling to survive in a hostile galaxy. They were something unique, something that advanced telepathic civilizations feared. Katie was waiting at the spaceport when Lisa finally returned home. Now taller and more mature, but still her daughter. The reunion was everything Lisa had dreamed of during her captivity, warm and joyful and perfectly human in its chaotic emotional complexity. Mom, she said, hugging her mother tightly, I knew you would. Come back. Soon come back. Lisa held her daughter and thought about Zara Lynn, somewhere in Zephyrian space, struggling to exist as something between two species. The alien had paid a terrible price for trying to break a human mind, but perhaps she had gained something as well. The galaxy was larger and stranger than anyone had imagined, filled with species that thought and felt in ways that defied understanding. But humanity had found its place in that vast cosmic community, not as servants or subjects, but as something that could not be controlled or dominated. The Zephyrian Empire issued secret directives to all military and civilian vessels. Human space was to be avoided at all costs. Contact with human minds was classified as a threat to imperial security. Any telepath who reported exposure to human consciousness was to be quarantined immediately. But it was too late. The knowledge had already spread through whispered conversations and classified reports. Humanity, the chaotic species whose minds could shatter, the greatest telepathic interrogators, had taken its place among the powers of the galaxy. Lisa Morgan returned to her life as a starship captain. But now she carried the knowledge that humanity was unique in ways they were only beginning to understand. They were not the strongest or the most advanced species in the galaxy, but they were something that no other civilization could safely touch. And in the depths of space, Zara Lynn sat in isolation, struggling to exist as something new. Something that carried within it the seeds of change that could transform an entire civilization. If given the chance, the human had returned home, broken in body, but not in spirit, carrying with her the proof that consciousness itself could be a weapon. The telepaths who had tried to break her had instead been broken themselves.